Good evening. Thank you all for coming today. Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Clubhouse. Thank you all for tuning in today. We really appreciate it. Like us on YouTube at Pastor Jeffrey Goodine. Subscribe and hit the bell to be notified. Like us on Facebook. Follow us at Church on Wheels. Let the Good News Roll. Facebook Live, Jeffrey Goodine. On Twitter at Goodine Jeffrey. Instagram, Goodine Jeffrey. And Clubhouse, Church on Wheels Ministry. Today I want to, today we're going to cover chapter 8. Chapter 8, again in the book, Putting Jesus in His Place, a case for the deity of Christ, by Robert Bowman. It can be found on Amazon, and so we'll be going through this, but we're setting the case for Jesus Christ tonight. Chapter 8. Jesus has always been there. On Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Clubhouse. If you send me an email at pastorjeffreygoodine@gmail.com. That's pastorjeffreygoodine@gmail.com. I'll add you to the list, and you will get a copy of the handout so that you could follow along with us, so that you could tune in, invite a friend, have a watch party. Now, in chapter 8, Jesus has always been there. Now, the very first sentence in the paragraph, some religious groups today acknowledge that Jesus existed before his physical birth and life on earth, but they deny that he is God. So now you have those that believe that Jesus existed before he was born, but yet he is not God. They say he's a created being. There is some text, there are scriptures in the Bible that point toward that in the interpretation. And there are some groups that take that interpretation. So tonight we're going to see that he was always there. And we're going to come from 4 different perspectives tonight. One out of the Synoptics, one from Paul, one from the Gospel according to John, and then one from Jude. And these scriptures point to the fact that Jesus has always been there. So if he's always been there, and he's not a created being, then he has to have the same deity as the Father. He has to. He was not created. So, all being in one, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and all being in one. Now, I want if we could turn to John chapter 8. We turn to John chapter 8. And in verse 58, and this speaks, and this is one of the reasons why they were mad at Jesus, because Jesus made a claim that they could not that they didn't believe. They call it blasphemy. In verse, really, if we start in verse verse 54. Jesus replied, if I glorify myself, my glory means nothing. My Father, whom you claim as your God, is the one who glorifies me. Though you do not know him, I know him. If I said I did not, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him and obey his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad. In verse 57, you are not yet 50 years old, they said to him, and you have seen Abraham? In verse 58, very truly I tell you, Jesus answered, before Abraham was born, I am. At this they picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple ground. Now, what he's saying is, he's telling them is before Abraham was born, I am. So Jesus is telling them that I existed. In other words, Abraham is looking for me, not me looking for him. But they, remember now, they revered Abraham as the father. So if we have somebody that comes along and claims to have existed before Abraham, who they revere, then they call it blasphemy. They call it blasphemy because they know Abraham. And so they're saying, wait a minute, you know, you're only 50 years old. How could you have met Abraham? And he told them that before Abraham was, I am. And now, and those are strong words. He's saying before Abraham existed, I existed.
Well, didn't Jesus or God tell Moses that I am?
Yeah, that I am. And so he's always been there. He's always been there. Now, and I put first person here. That is Jesus speaking in the first person. Jesus speaking in the first person. He's saying before Abraham was, I am. Like I am. Long before Abraham, I am. I still am. And again, if you really look at it, now you see why they were after Jesus. Jesus made claims that they couldn't understand. Their thing was, wait a minute, you ain't even 50 years old yet. And you talking about you met Abraham? Abraham waiting to see you? And he's telling that Abraham was glad when he saw my day. So, again, blasphemy. And, you know, they were after Jesus. So now you see why they were after him. He made all these claims. And they thought it was blasphemy for anybody to say that he, especially anybody living, would be before Abraham. So if they claim Abraham is the father, then there's no way that Jesus or no way that this earthly person could be before Abraham. So that's him speaking in the first person. If we turn to Psalms 90, Psalms 90 and 2, this speaks in the second person. Psalm 90. Well, really, starting in verse 1, and I'm reading from the King James Version. It said, Lord, thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever thou hast formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, thou art God. Thou art God. From the beginning. So in Psalms, they're saying that he existed from the beginning. In other words, before the mountains and before anything the world was brought forth, before any of that, from everlasting to everlasting, from eternity to eternity. I guess, can you go from eternity to eternity? I know in high-level mathematics, there is such thing as negative infinity. From negative infinity to positive infinity. I have yet to figure that out. But I did get the answer right on the test. But the reasoning behind it is negative infinity to positive infinity. I guess.
Right to left?
Yeah, I guess, you know.
Is it before, like, the earth was even invented to after it gets destroyed or replaced?
Right. So, when we speak of the beginning, again, time. Time cannot go back to infinity. It has to be a starting point. There has to be a starting point. Well, on the other side of that starting point is what we call God. Put things in motion. Well, that's where Jesus existed. Before all of this. Before all of this. And John made it clear that in the beginning was the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Genesis, in the beginning. So there had to be a start. Well, something had to start it. Something had to do creation. And Jesus was there. So in Psalms 90, we speak of the second person. They're talking about Jesus. That is the second person. So the Bible speaks, and Jesus speaks in first person, and the Old Testament really is kind of speaking in second person. The Old Testament speaks of the Messiah to come. That man is just mortal man. The Messiah to come. Well, the New Testament speaks of the Messiah that has come and coming again. Well, Jesus Christ. I mean, yeah. But there are people that believe that Jesus existed before he was born, that he was always there, but he should not have the deity of God. Well, somebody back at this front end, before time, well, if you don't call that God, then there's got to be something before that. The uncalled cause. So, Jesus has always been there. Let's think about that. He's always been there. Matthew chapter 23. We turn to Matthew chapter 23. Matthew 23. And then around verse 37.
Psalm 90. Have Moses, the man of God.
37.
Dwelling place throughout all generations.
And it says, and this is,
Everlasting to everlasting.
and this is after Jesus speaking woes to the Pharisees. And he says, verse 37, says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who killed the prophets and stoned those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chick under her wings, and you were not willing. Jesus is making reference here to the stoning of the prophets, of them killing the prophets. The Old Testament has major and minor prophets. Now, The difference between the major and the minor prophets in the Bible is the length of the book. That's the only difference.
It's what now?
The length of the book. The longer books in the Old Testament about the prophets, they call them major prophets. The short books about the prophets, they call them minor prophets. But all of them were important during their time. There was prophecy before captivity, when they talk about captivity. There was prophets during captivity that was telling them to keep their heads up, and, things of that nature. And then there were prophets after captivity. So the difference between when you hear major prophets and minor prophets in the Bible, really the only difference is the length of the book. They would consider Isaiah a major prophet, but Malachi a minor prophet. But both of them were their time. Now, and when we see here, again, Jesus is talking about how at the beginning they were stoning the prophets, and he wanted to gather the people together, but the people were all scattered, and they were not willing. They were not willing. So when we speak of gathering the people together, that's in the Old Testament, where they're telling them they were gathering the people. Because remember, whenever they did wrong, the enemy came and they were scattered. And then they would bring them back. They would be good for a little while. And then they would go off and do it again. But Jesus here is saying that, letting them know that he's talking about his existence long before them. So if Jesus is talking in the first person about his existence to your ancestors, and you date your ancestors all the way back to Abraham, and he says that before Abraham, I am, then again, Jesus it's always been there. Our deity has always been there. But there are people that claim that he was not. That he was not. That he was created. I don't know what to tell them. I mean, the Bible speaks, Jesus speaks of himself as being, as pre-existing before the world. But then we start using our human comprehension, and our human comprehension cannot get that because, and then the problem we have with human comprehension is that we cannot comprehend infinity. We cannot comprehend eternity. Because we don't know anything that has ever lived forever. We have not lived forever. So we don't have no base for eternity. We just don't understand it. We say it, but we really, really don't understand it because we don't know anything that has ever existed forever. We never seen anything exist forever. In fact, we're not going to exist forever in this mortal body. So to speak in terms of existing before creation, that takes a faith belief and a following of the Bible if you believe in the Bible. Now, if you don't believe in the Bible, then, it's all a moot point. If you don't believe in the Bible. It's a moot point. The Bible speaks of Jesus Christ. But if you don't believe in the Bible, I guess. Then we won't argue about that. Because if you don't believe in the Bible, then there ain't no sense in us sitting here arguing because I do. I believe in the Bible, you don't, so let's leave it like that. But I'm pretty sure you do. I'm pretty sure.
Genesis, it said, let us create man in our image.
Right.
Meaning there's more than one.
There's more than one. So, but then those that don't believe the Bible, I don't know what to tell you.
It's their loss.
Yeah, I just don't know what to tell you. But I believe in the Bible. You know, I believe in Jesus Christ. Now, you can agree or disagree. I mean, it's okay. But I say, and I believe that he existed long before creation. That he was already, he's the uncaused cause. Nothing caused him. But there was a time that started. Because if we take time and we go backwards, you cannot go back to infinity. It has to go back to a starting point. It has to. The Bible speaks of it. Now even the Big Bang Theory people noticed that something had to happen. At least they can agree that that something started in time. But depending on how it started, they use that theory. I use the Bible theory. But we all agree that it had to have start at some point. It had to start at some point. So then, you know, my question is, what put the Big Bang in motion? It didn't. It just didn't. It just didn't. Oh, it may have. What is that? Self-combust. There was so much energy. There was spontaneous combustion. There was so much energy in the universe that it spontaneously combusted and we were created. Yeah.
I think that theory's busted.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm pretty
All
sure.
that energy.
How come there are no square planets?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
And how come some planets rotate right to left and
Yeah.
others left to right?
So, you know, hey, you know, it is what it is. I can go along with that. Whatever they say, sure. But you ask me, and I know you won't. I believe in Jesus Christ. I believe in the Bible, and I believe He existed, and I believe He do the same deity as the Father. That's what I believe. That's what I believe. Okay. The second one on page 95, we see Paul. Now, Paul. Now, this one you're gonna have to. I mean, Paul made a statement here about the wilderness. Now, the author is saying it's not as far-fetched as you think it is, but the argument, what they're using in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 is that the rock he's talking about is not Jesus, but a type of Jesus. Now, I don't know where you can have a type of Jesus at. He said it was a type of, they say that what he was referring to was a type of Jesus. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Now, again, what I want you to see is you understand all of these ideologies and all of these viewpoints, and you can see where people can be actually led astray. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Now, and starting verse 1, it says, and this is Paul speaking about the wilderness. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud and that all passed through the sea. So he's talking about, making reference in the Old Testament. He's making reference of the Exodus. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink. This is them being fed, the manna and the water in the desert. For they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. So he's making a case for Christ existing in the same notion that the God that helped them in the wilderness is Christ. So he's making the point that Christ was already ready, as they say, already ready. He was always there. So he was there with them back in the wilderness. So you see, to minimize that effect, they say that he meant that it was a type of Christ. So if we say they all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was a type of Christ. Now we're adding into some other entity that along with Christ.
But that's not what the word says.
Huh?
The word says that rock was Christ.
Right, that rock was Christ. But a lot of them interpret this as saying that that rock was not really Christ. It was a type of Christ, because they're not associating Christ back in the Old Testament. So you see, if we don't, now think about it this way, if you don't associate Christ back in the Old Testament, then Christ would be a created being because of the birth. Then Christ would be a created being, which has no deity at all. So let's think about this for a minute. Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Clubhouse, Congregate, anybody, let's think about this for a minute. If Christ was not associated back in the Old Testament with God, if he's only coming and created and being the birth, then then why do we call on him? He's just mortal man. If that's the case, then Christ would just be mortal man, which is what some people believe. But, so when we make prayer, we say what? In Jesus' name. So he has to have some deity. It's not just, in the pastor's name. No, don't do that. Because I'm sure they're not praying in your name. So you see the flaw in the theory. So they are, Paul is reminding them to not make the same mistake that they did in the wilderness, or what got them in the wilderness, or what they were doing in the wilderness. Don't remind them that Christ is taking care of them. He's always there. He's always there. He's always been there. So Paul is making a statement, and they are trying to shoot him down. Because see, now all you got to do is change one word and say that rock, yes, 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 we believe yes, 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 but that rock was a type of Christ. Well, if it was a type of Christ, then there's another entity that is on the level with Christ? I mean, you see the flaw in that theory? But, you know, I guess. You know, look, they got all kinds of arguments. They got all kinds of things to talk against Jesus Christ. But guess what? When Moore and Paul is on their deathbed, they ain't praying to no type of Christ. They're not calling on a type of Christ. Trust me, they're calling on Jesus for help. What if Jesus said, what if Jesus said, you call Jesus for help, Jesus, well, I'm busy right now, go over there and get that type like me. And then you say, a type like you, yeah, isn't that what you're saying? That it's not really me, there's another entity? Well, then you go over to that entity and let me know how that works out for you. Now, you know we don't want Jesus saying that, because there is no other. But they say that there is. You know, take it for what it's worth, y'all. You listen to it. Okay, let's go to John chapter 8. John chapter 8. Now John, remember now, the gospel according to John is not a synoptic gospel. It does not give anything. It looks strictly at the deity of Jesus Christ. John speaks of the deity of Jesus Christ. That's all he talks about, is the deity of Jesus Christ. John chapter 8. And then we go down to verse 56. And when you see, again, they're back to, what is it? What is it that nobody wants to believe that Jesus existed before he was born? That's beyond our comprehension. That's beyond our comprehension. Is that something existed? Now listen, now look, now I know that we say that when we see little kids, you know, growing up, we used to say things. They done been here before. But because of their smartness, they done been here before. Well, that's just speaking. We know that they have not been here before. At least we hope they haven't. Because if they've been here before, I want them to tell me what it looks like in the future.
Those people that believe in reincarnation.
Yeah. Tell me what it looks like. Because you, wait a minute, let me see. You, in the future, which hasn't gotten here yet, you were there, you died, came back, reincarnated in this lifetime. So now I'm going to ask you, can you tell me what that is like? Since you existed before this time. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I thought. But anyway. Okay, when we see that he said, before Abraham was born, I am. So they picked up stones to throw at him, to stone him. Because he said, wait a minute, I existed before Abraham was born. Isaiah saw him on the throne, but Isaiah could not tell them. All he spoke of was the glory of him. He could not describe. All he spoke of was the glory. Now, if we go down into the last paragraph here, and I'm on page 96, when they say most biblical scholars agree, but go farther, Jesus' statement in John 8 expresses not only existence prior to Abraham, but also existence of a different order than that of Abraham. So, a different order of Abraham. So he didn't exist in human form per se. A different order. Now, said Abraham, who came into being, and they gave some words here that, that was hard for me to pronounce. Said what Jesus simply is. So in other words, Abraham was born, which meant that Abraham came into being, which means Abraham had to be created. Well, if Jesus said, if they're claiming that Abraham is the father, and Jesus is saying that Abraham was glad to see his day, and then he said that Abraham was born, that means Abraham was created. I am. So, before Abraham was born or created, I am. I existed. And they got mad at him. They got mad at him. And they wanted to stone him. Because they could not comprehend that this mortal man could have existed before Abraham. But yes, he did. On page 97, if you see here in Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 6 says, in the year of King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him, each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Now, you saw him on the throne. He could not explain. He just saw what was around him, but he could not explain. And this is where, if you ever heard the song, Send Me, I'll Go, when the throne spoke to him and said, who is going to tell them? And Isaiah says, send me, I'll go. Send me. So who's going to tell the world? Who's going to tell them? And he says, send me. Well, again, a created being was born, and Jesus said, I am. So Jesus existed before Abraham was born, but they don't want to. They say that's blasphemy, and they wanted to stone him. Ain't that something? They can't comprehend it. Now I know it's a little hard for people to understand, but this is where your faith comes in. This is where your faith in the Bible, this is your belief in the Bible, and your faith in Jesus Christ. And again, if you have any doubt, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Clubhouse, congregation, anybody in the end. If you have any doubt about the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, your Christianity is for naught. That is the basis of Christianity. That is the foundation of Christianity. And it speaks of it in the Bible. the birth, the death, and the resurrection of our Lord and Savior. But he's always been there. So he's due. He's due. All right, let's go to Jude. Jude, and I put 4 to 5 because Jude really is only one chapter. It's really not a chapter per se. We call it a chapter, but it's just the book of Jude. The book of Jude. He's the brother of James. And here he speaks about people not believing. And we go to Jude, and it says, dear friends, although I was very eager to write to you about the salvation we share, I felt compelled to write and urge you to contend for the faith that was once for all entrusted to God's holy people. Again, he's talking about our faith. You must have faith in Jesus Christ. You must hold on to your faith. And your faith says that he existed, that he's always been there. He is not a created being, as some will say. For certain individuals whose condemnation was written about long ago have secretly slipped in among you. These are ungodly people who pervert the grace of our God into a license for immorality and deny Jesus Christ, our only sovereign and Lord. Well, if Jesus Christ is our sovereign and Lord, that means that he has been around forever. He is Lord. He didn't, okay. We can't create a Lord. I mean, we can create wooden things, glass things, idols, whatever, and we can pray to them. But we are talking to them like a God, but we're not talking to the Lord. We're just talking to an object. That is the difference. Even Paul, when he was in Philippi, said, wait a minute, you all are worshiping a God you don't even know. You got a monument to an unknown God. So if you don't know who the God is, but you got a monument, I mean, how does that sound? But people believe. Now, here again, here Jude is talking about people that are coming in, that are slipping in, that is perverting Jesus Christ. They're coming in and saying, yes, we know Jesus, yeah, he's all that, but he was created because he's considered God's son. So if he's considered a son, it means he was created. He came birth through a woman. Yes, he was created. So he's not due all of the deity that and Jude makes a point here that they are creeping into the church. Now remember, in Book of Revelation, it says that even even the wise is going to be fooled. Even followers are going to be fooled in the last days. The Book of Revelation speaks of that. That those ones that they're going to be fooled. Well, guess what? Jude is saying that these people have already crept into the church. They've already come in. They're already here. It's kind of like how they say the little cells that that are already there and they're just waiting for that time. Well, they're already here. And they will pervert Jesus Christ. They will pervert Jesus Christ so until you be to the point where you don't know what to believe. If you're not strong in your faith in Jesus Christ, then they're going to come and tell you that Jesus Christ was created, and therefore he is not due the deity that God has exalted to him, that he's not worthy to be sitting on the throne, that he's just mortal man. Jews said they've already crept in. What that means is they is already here. They are here. And they will contend for your faith. So, the question, do you believe that Jesus existed before he was born? Now, let's get rid of your thought. Let's go to the Bible. You say you believe the Bible. Well, Jesus speaks in the first person in John chapter 8, verse 58. He speaks in the first person. He said that before Abraham was born, I am. So I existed before who you believe to be the Father. I existed before him. So if you can only go back to Abraham as your ancestor, then Jesus said, I existed before him. So if they could only track their ancestry